Hello, I'm Adam Southern, and this is Page by Page, a show dedicated to promoting literacy, authors, their works, and their words. And today I'm honored to have Joy Jordan Lake with me. Joy is the author of over 5 books, including the 2009 Christie Award-winning book, Blue Hole Back Home. So thanks for being with me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Adam.
You're welcome. First, let's talk a little bit about you. Other than an author, I understand that you're a professor at Belmont?
Part-time, which I enjoy very much. I teach in the Honors College there, and it's a delight.
And creative writing, is that something that you teach or have taught in the past?
Have taught that, love teaching literature. I love when they tell me I can just sort of make up a course and, you know, the works of Jane Austen or something like that. It's great fun. Or Southern novels is this fall, so excited about that. Yeah, right up your alley.
That is, right up my alley. So you've taught creative writing. So what is one bit of advice or some of the best advice that you could give anyone interested in writing?
Well, keep reading for one thing. And most writers, you don't have to tell them that. Most people who want to write love to read. But sometimes you feel like you have to stop reading in order to write, and there's that delicate balance. I know sometimes when I'm reading the greats, I can get just paralyzed thinking, I'll never write like Faulkner, so why try? Just stop. You know, and so there's that balance of keeping reading and keeping writing. You know, all of us are busy, and the day after day can go by, and if you don't just find a time, if it's 5 in the morning or 1 in the morning sometime, to keep writing. Most writers, I think, suffer from a sort of low self-esteem, that those voices in your head of, I can't do this, who am I kidding, can just take over if you're not just regularly setting that time aside and not fighting those battles of, you know, am I going to write today or not? You just get up and do it.
Right. And that's what pretty much everybody we've ever asked on the show, they've always said keep reading.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see what people suggest, and that reading has always been the answer. So if you're interested in writing, keep reading. Now let's jump into your book, Blue Hole Back Home. Is this your only novel?
It is. I started a novel actually 18 years ago that I'm just now finishing, and all the other books have come in between, and that novel just kept crashing and burning. And this one is my only novel so far, but interestingly enough, even though it wasn't my first novel to write, it was my first novel to get published, and it really falls more into a pattern where a lot of writers discover their first novel as sort of a coming-of-age, slightly autobiographical novel, and that's exactly what this one is for me.
It was a great book. I really enjoyed reading it.
Thank you for reading it. It's very kind of you.
It was. It's set in the South, and of course it talks about racial tensions, and it's not the typical what we think of a Southern racial tension, black and white, 1960s or pre-1960s. This is the 1970s, late 1979. What was the reason for setting it that late?
Well, that for me was my growing up time. I was a teenager in the late 70s, early 80s, and it really honestly wasn't until I moved to Boston, and my friends were all from the north there. My husband had just gotten married. My husband was from Southern California, but he'd gone to college in New England, and I would just sort of blithely tell these stories from my childhood, and I would just see these horrified looks, and I guess I hadn't thought about these stories. I had thought of them as painful stories, but I hadn't thought of them being so sort of out of joint with time, that some of these things from my past that were painful in terms of racial tensions were happening in late 70s and past what should have been racial turmoil. But for Chattanooga and where I was growing up, these things were sort of going on sort of behind the scenes, and not always talked about real openly. And so I guess that's what prompted me to write, for, I guess, explaining as much to myself as for anything else, sort of how do I put together the town that I loved, where I grew up, with such kind people, such beauty, with some pretty horrific things going on behind the scenes.
Now, we mentioned it before, it's not the black and white issue. It's a Sri Lankan family. They moved to Pisgah Ridge, and we just see how the townspeople react to this family being there. And you said it was based on true events, and kind of interested to see if there was maybe a sauna in your past that you based this character on.
I did. Her actual name was Shyama Hanafa. And I used, in the writing of the novel, I used her actual name through the whole writing and till the very last moment when you're making sort of the galley changes. And I just said to my editor, by the way, it meant a lot to me to use her real name, even though the character is fictionalized. The sort of my heart feeling about this character was very much based on my friend Shyama. And I said, by the way, is there a legal or ethical problem with using her real name? And my editor was like, yes! No, we've got to change it. So we changed the name. My oldest child and I got on the internet looking for, the name had to be Sri Lankan, and it had to be Muslim, and it had to be female. So, trying to find, and I wanted it to have this sort of same beautiful ring as Shyama Hanafa. So that's how we came up with Rosanna.
Were the events in your novel kind of similar to those that in your past with this young lady?
They were. A Sri Lankan family moved to my town, Signal Mountain, Tennessee. I set the novel in North Carolina in sort of a cowardly attempt to allow myself to go back to my hometown and eat barbecue. I thought, if I set it in North Carolina, no one will notice. But it's been very interesting. Again, a very, very gracious town, Signal Mountain, but it's been interesting, the conversation since the book came out. No one, of course, was fooled. Everyone recognized a lot of these events. And even though a lot of them are fictionalized, they're based on some actual things that were going on Signal Mountain and in Chattanooga. But it brought up some interesting conversations about why people my age didn't know, for example, that the guy who killed Medgar Evers in cold blood lived on our mountain after he was acquitted in Mississippi, lived there for years and years and years, and nobody talked about it. And things like that I think people in my generation were wondering, why was there not a conversation? And anyway, it's brought up some interesting conversations. But yes, there was a Sri Lankan family who moved to town, and their daughter and I became friends. We were about the same age, 1 grade apart, but we met, became friends, and she actually started coming to my church. It was an all-white church, but very warm and welcoming. And there's somebody who popped into the mail a Polaroid picture for me of this youth group. We're all looking kind of, late 70s ragged, and we're all beaming. And there at the very center is Shyama, beautiful young woman. But based on how some folks in town, very small minority, but some folks in town, her family was threatened, a cross was burned in their yard, some pretty awful things happened. So,
well, it was very interesting to read the book, and it says on the title page, inspired by a true story, and I wondered if it was somewhat autobiographical for a good deal through the book. And talked about the Mangy Pack in the book, this band of friends that, of course, work together, and then they go and swim together. And they set the book in motion by stopping and asking this young Sri Lankan girl to go swimming with them. And what did this do to the story? I mean, it really just sets it in motion, doesn't it?
Well, I hope so. Thank you for saying that. I sort of conflated 2 swimming holes that actually exist in that area. One is called the Blue Hole, and one's called Rainbow Falls. And the way the characters have to descend down this long hill and that's really based on Rainbow Falls, but took the name the Blue Hole, and the rope swing is based on both places. And I guess I was just remembering times when, that for any of us, there are these places of just grace and acceptance, and I wanted there to be one of those, of just the innocence that really transcends any kind of divisions in the adult world or any kind of bigotry. And I wanted there to be a place where all that is sort of set aside for a while, a place of safety, and yet even those places sometimes get invaded by the bigotry from the outside world. So I guess that's what was in my head. And it was just one of those things that sort of haunted me for several years before I sat down and wrote the book.
The story had a very strong subject matter. but there was also humor throughout, a lot of humor through the lines of Jimbo especially. And Jimbo, if you grew up in a small southern town, everybody had a Jimbo, I think.
That's right.
How hard is it to write humor in between the lines of this strong subject matter?
You know, hard in that you don't want to trivialize these enormous issues, and you don't want to trivialize tragedy or bigotry. At the same time, that's very Southern, isn't it? To somehow interweave humor into everything. I was interviewing someone yesterday when I got to be the interviewer about the history of Belmont University. At one point, this person said, you know, we couldn't even afford the boards to nail over the windows. I thought, that's so Southern. That's so great. But that sort of, you know, sometimes gallows humor, but, you know, sometimes making fun of ourselves, making fun of our town, making fun of, but a lot of times with a lot of truth in there. And I think for at least me, you know, a lot of us, if we feel like we're being preached at, we get our defenses up. But if we can laugh at ourselves or laugh along with someone, sometimes, you know, sometimes we can start conversations that we couldn't if we had our defenses up. So I hope the humor, and to me that's just very much my experience of the South. That's one thing I missed when I lived in the North. I loved New England, but I missed that, just that sort of self-deprecating Southern humor and that very vivid humor, very, very picturesque way of seeing the world that Southerners do so well.
Yeah, I agree, and I think a lot of people deal with a hard situation by laughing at themselves. And, I don't want to give away a whole lot of your book, but as I got close to the end of it, I will admit I might have cried a little bit, but don't tell anybody.
It takes a real man to admit that.
But it seemed kind of an open ending to the book, and did you leave it that way for a sequel, or do you want people to just draw their own conclusions as to what happens next?
I actually, well, I'll try not to give anything away either. I actually originally ended a slightly different way, and I was on vacation with my family and got a call from my editor who said, okay, you've set the entire book up for this to happen, and you pull your punch. You're being a coward. And I said, I'm just, you know, all my kids were sort of 9 and younger at that point, and I said, I'm in the all about preservation of life stage of season of life. I'm not going to kill anybody right here. And we had some interesting conversations, and you know, it's up to the author, obviously, what you do, but it's good to have those people in your life to kind of challenge you about, are you pulling your punches there? And so some things actually changed with the ending, but I really still wanted to leave it open-ended, partly because I still hope someday to be able to reconnect with the actual woman behind the character Sana, with my friend Shyama. And I've made some attempts to find her and got really, really close at some point that she's possibly living on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., which is where her family moved when things got so hard in our town and so ugly. And she, this line comes up in the book, which comes from real life. She and I, the last time I saw her, she and I were standing outside our house, and she said, and we were both crying, and she said, my father promised me when we moved from Sri Lanka that if we were to move to the United States, it would be the end of the rainbow. Explain to me what happened. And I have no idea what I said. And I think maybe that's why I wrote the book, because I'm haunted by the fact that I remember in my 16-year-old brain that I wanted to somehow make it okay, and I wanted to explain, and I wanted to make it all make sense in American culture, and why this sweet, warm town would do this to a family. And I don't remember what I said, and I think probably I probably said nothing that made any sense, and certainly was not helpful to me or her. And so I guess I've always wanted to be able to find her and reconnect, and you know, sort of start that friendship over again.
Well, it's hard. 15, 16-year-old kids.
Yeah.
They were dealing with a lot of heavy stuff in this book. And was it by design that you never had them go tell an adult about what was happening, or did you just think, let's just keep it moving this way and see what happens with the kids trying to deal with this huge issue on their own?
You know, people ask that in book clubs all the time, and it often breaks into sort of a debate within the book club. Some of us who grew up with just a lot of freedom to sort of run around on bikes or pickup trucks or horses or whatever, and those who were closely watched by their parents. And I had fabulous parents, but I just remember a tremendous amount of freedom and not a lot of checking with every little thing in the adult world. And so I guess I reflected at least what I felt like my experience was of teenagers really trying to work out those ethical issues themselves, and sometimes seeing the adults be these fabulous role models and sometimes being really disillusioned by their role models letting them down terribly.
And at the center of everything, of course, was Sonia. And, of course, she's got two beaux, or two men that were interested in her a little bit there. And just was kind of expecting to figure out more about this lover's triangle of sorts in the book. Did you ever think about writing more about the romance part of the book, or because they were teenagers you didn't want to delve into it that way? Or
You know, I did, and I've even tinkered with a sequel that would be more up to date. I guess they'd be more in their 40s now, but I've certainly tinkered with that, and I thought of delving a little more, but I guess it came from a short story. This novel was originally a short story, and so when I began expanding it, actually at the suggestion of a wonderful book critic the Chattanooga Times used to have, this is just sort of how it evolved at the time. So it'd be interesting to see what would happen. I sort of missed the characters, so I'd love to go back somehow.
I can see how you would miss the characters. They were a great bunch of kids. I can look forward to every time they had a discussion. LJ, his smart aleck comments, and everybody had an LJ, a Jimbo, and an Emerson, I think, growing up, or at least I hope they did.
Yeah.
So you might see a return to Blue Hole sometime in the future, maybe?
Maybe so, maybe so. I'm still trying to finish up that novel now that I started 18 years ago. So, and that's been a tricky one too, because it goes back and forth in time between 1822 and present day. So there's a lot of really hard stuff, particularly in the historical sections. But then there's humor interwoven, and that's, as you say, that's hard, because you don't want to trivialize the tragedy. But it's also very Southern, so it's been slippery. I need your help.
Well, can you tell us a little bit more about the next book, or is it?
Well, it's set in Charleston, South Carolina, which if you've never been there, it's, don't stop, go, just leave tonight, go straight there. It's just, this fascinating city with this enormous historical district. And I just became fascinated with the tensions there, and so it's sort of a murder mystery in present day, but a lot of the tensions and the mystery have to do with what happened in 1822 with there was an attempted slave revolt that was brutally put down, and just in reading about it years ago, there were some just fascinating characters that I had never learned about in history class, didn't learn about until graduate school, and so there again was just fascinated, and I couldn't figure out for years and years. I kept writing it. I wrote it as a historical novel, and that somehow didn't work. And I wrote it it was just so dark and horrible, and wrote it as kind of a present day mystery, and where they sort of, in very phony ways, discovered these things about the past. It totally didn't work. And then finally began alternating chapter by chapter, and at that point it was sort of, finally, this is it. And my good writer friends who've read through it with me and my agent have finally, been good about saying no all along, and then finally, ding. So it's been a long road.
You're on the right track, man.
I hope so.
I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you.
I hope it will be as good as this one. If you've matched this book, you've done something, because this was a very well-written book.
You're very kind.
And no, I really enjoyed it, and I think everybody else will too. Can you tell us where people can get copies of that?
It's you can order it anywhere, any bookstore, Barnes & Noble, or any wonderful independent bookstores. I think Parnassus in Nashville carries it, and of course Amazon. It's on Amazon, so it's pretty readily available.
Readily available, just any bookshop and hopefully every library. Do you have a website where people can find more information?
I do, and I need to update it more, but it's just joyjordanlake.com. It's very easy.
Thank you for watching Page by Page. You can find out more information about us online at pagebypagetv.com, and you can also visit the Maury County Library website. Keep reading.